Hello, Tina. Hello, Lux. Welcome to the show.
Here,
Hi, Miriam.
I am looking forward to learn about you, about StreamAlive, the software that you're building that has the potential to revolutionize the way we interact on Zoom with large groups. Yes. Fingers crossed. And before we explore all of that and engagement with large group and why it often fails, I always start with the same question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
Lux, take this.
Okay, so we're a fan of your episodes, so we kind of knew this question might be coming because we've heard you ask other guests this question as well. And we pondered over it as in, I like to think of ourselves as almost a meta facilitator of sorts, because a lot of the people who use us are facilitators and we help facilitate the job of a facilitator. So therefore, I think we are kind of allowed to call ourselves a meta facilitator because that's really our universe. We're building tools and technologies to help facilitators use technology in an interesting way to facilitate. So meta facilitators is kind of what I'll go with.
I love that. How about you, Tina?
Yeah, to add to what Lux is saying, we help facilitators facilitate, right? So meta facilitator sounds very accurate to me, and I think the genesis, which we'll come to later also, of why StreamAlive and how StreamAlive and what is StreamAlive. We'll kind of explore that as to why we are a meta facilitator and why StreamAlive is built with the facilitator in mind. Yeah. So.
I think the only negative of that can be that when you say meta facilitator, someone will think that you're owned by Facebook or something like that. So we definitely going to give that impression.
Good point. And I still hope that the audience, they know me by now a little bit, and they know that I love the meta level conversations and discussions.
Oh,
so yeah, more sometimes on the abstract philosophical. And it's interesting because your tool is a facilitator of facilitators. So yeah, the connotation of meta facilitation, I like that. And maybe you explain briefly what StreamAlive is, and then I would be curious whether this was the first time you came across facilitation to work with facilitators directly, or whether there's a story before that made you curious about group work.
Yeah. I'm happy to dive into the first one, and then Tina, maybe you can speak about our collective experience at being in the receiving end of a lot of sessions and group sessions with facilitators, because some of those we've experienced in various shared domains, right? Whether it's college or work or stuff. But quick intro to what StreamAlive does. As the name suggests, we like to make live sessions a lot more alive. And I think the alive part is, our philosophy is, can you move sessions from whether they're online or offline, because now the world is moving to hybrid. So it's a lot of online, but also a mix of both. Can you move it from 95% of the audience being ignored to 95% engaged, right? And the whole idea is, can we give everyone a voice, which in theory sounds fantastic, and we'll dive into the details on how we do that a little later without getting too much into the weeds. But the interesting thing is, every online platform, whether it's Zoom, on which we're recording this right now, or whether it's Facebook Live, which Meta owns, since we just talked about that a moment ago, or whether it's Twitch or WebEx or Google Meet or Teams or YouTube Live or any of these platforms, the common currency to each and every one of them is chat. And people are chatting, right? and people like to have their voice heard, and that is a very powerful thing in our opinion, which is not harnessed in enough ways. So our thinking was, can you give the audience a visual collective voice through chat, and therefore allow them to be and it's honestly not something new, because we've all been in places where in a physical world you ask someone, hey, raise your hand if you agree with me, and 2/3 of the room raises their hands, and you know that, okay, the majority of the room agrees with me. Now, that is a very binary response. Is it a yes, hands up, or no,
Mhm.
hands down? With chat, you have so much more color. It's like, you had black and white here, and now you've got all this entire canvas of colors because people are putting words and sentences and emojis and things there. Can we harness it in interesting ways, and therefore give a voice to the audience, and therefore move them from ignored to engage? So it's an online platform that helps do all of that. Won't get fully into the details. I'm sure we'll chat about some of it, but and we'll chat about the origin story of why we built this. But your second question, Miriam, I mean, have we been in sessions with facilitators? Feel free to chime in on both our behalves on the many sessions that we've been a part of.
Well, yeah, so like you, Miriam, I like to be a bit philosophical about this. Um, Throughout all our lives, right from our days in school, our days in college, our workplaces, um, and outside of workplaces, professional organizations where we become part of, or conferences or events, or anywhere where there are large groups of people of 25 and above, or even 20 and above also, right? um i i, I think I would put it in there are two driving forces, which drives how inclusive or how engaged the participants are. I think the first one falls along the personality type of an individual. Um, Throughout my life, I've had phases. In school, I was quiet, I was shy. I did not participate so much in class because I was very shy. So I was very shy. So therefore, there are a lot of people in the world who are shy, who, are not very they're not out there and become the front benchers, we used to call them in school, like who like raise up their hands and answer all the questions, and then they are the backbenchers who will like quietly just absorb everything and are too shy to raise up their hands and answer questions or to participate. In the workplace also, we've been part of a lot of company wide meetings or large group meetings. I work in a bank, like I was telling you earlier. So we have these, and then you have cross geography teams, right? Like we have all these distributed teams where we had to have these meetings, these large meetings. And then when we go for events or when we go for these different conferences, so there are two types of people. There are the confident ones who always love to participate and raise their hands and answer questions. And then there are the shy ones who have a lot to give if they participate, but they're too shy to really participate. So that's a personality type. And uh, if a good facilitator can also bring in the ones who are shy and give them the opportunity and the room to participate and to be able to extract that. So we have seen that. I've seen some of that in my work life, and I've seen some of that in some events, where an in-person event or even a hybrid or even a online event also. um, I think Gwyn is one of, I would like to call her out. I love the way she facilitates. I
Yeah,
attend
she's
to
been on
some.
the show.
Yeah, so I love the way she facilitates. And John Chen, what an
Mm.
amazing guy. He
Also on
facilitates
the show. Yeah.
amazing. So working, and then now that we started working with more facilitators, our eyes really open up to see how that is such an important point of bringing these different personalities together to a similar place, where they can both participate and contribute, right? And
Mhm.
make the the meeting or make the event a much more inclusive, much more diverse, much more interesting, much more happening, and much more enjoyable. That is one factor, which is the personality type. The second factor in my personal experience is that the size of the group is so large. Like there are sometimes these 100 people events or 500 people events or 1,000 or 5,000 people events, which Lux had mentioned that you raise up your hands and all that is a very binary responses you can get. The size itself makes it difficult to be able to get all the participants to bring in all the color and to bring in all the nuances and bring in all their thoughts and all their contributions to the large group, these large group exercises or these large group meetings or events. So because suppose if you say, where are you from in a 1,000 people event and everyone recites out the name of the place they're from, that's it. The whole of the event is gone just listening to everyone recite out there. So I think those are the two main things which we figured out in our own personal experiences, that these are the two things which are right now a challenge for making it more participative, for making it more inclusive, for making it more engaging, for making it more dynamic event. So I think Lux, you may have some other thoughts around that too.
So what I hear, sorry to jump in, what I hear is that there are online and offline events, and it's about participate or equalizing the room, democratizing the space where everyone can contribute who wants to contribute in a way that is that they get heard. Because when you just shared the experience of using the chat, yes, the chat is amazing, but if you ask people, oh, just use the chat and share where you're from, this goes faster than everyone's speaking up, but then and everyone feels overwhelmed because it's just too much information. And then to screen through the chat, this would rather be times when we do have a co-facilitator, for instance. So what you said is from being 95% ignored, basically because they're lost in the chat, to 95% engaged because they're seen and heard, because StreamAlive then makes the translation or puts it onto a screen or extract the information and puts it onto a screen.
Exactly that. So just to triangulate between what we just said, Miriam, in terms of StreamAlive, putting it in a screen and making it totally heard, and the example you and Tina discussed about the maps, that's a great example, right? Where you ask the question, hey, where's everybody from? And you get 200 responses or even 25 responses. And then you eyeball 2 people and you say, wow, we got Tina from New Jersey, we got Miriam from Amsterdam, and then remaining 48 people who gave me an answer. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to call you out because otherwise I'll sound like a geography teacher, right? So that's what we do. And that's what I mean by we are effectively ignoring the majority of the people, because here is someone who has actually given you a little peek into their life story, saying, I live in Cairo, for example. And there is a story around why they are in Cairo, what they do in Cairo, but we're just closing that entire chapter because we can't acknowledge that person. So what we do at StreamAlive with this particular instance is, as people are typing in their chat, the presenter shows a map, and the map is coming alive with little dots. So Tina types New Jersey, boom, a dot comes up in Jersey. You type Amsterdam, boom, a dot comes up in Amsterdam. Someone else types Berlin, someone types Copenhagen, a big dot comes up in Europe around that part because you got so many people from there. The presenter says, oh, we got so many people in Europe, zooms in there. So the presenter with their audience is literally flying around the world on a free first-class ticket, visiting everybody one after the other, and visually acknowledging everyone. Because even if it's a fifth of a second where a person's name comes up on screen and you plot them, it's a whole lot different from pretending they don't exist by not calling them out at all, right? So,
and it's interesting that you're saying that, because makes me just realize that very often we ask this question basically to kill time. So not only are we ignoring them, but also we're actually misleading them, pretending as if we're interested. Although we are not. We want them to use the chat, not to fall asleep, and we want to kill a little bit of time until everyone is there. So it's even more frustrating if we ask them to do a task that is basically useless. And then by putting it on a map, they then also have something to use with their eyeballs, and you see how diverse or undiverse the group is. And with this information, you can then also do something, because, sorry if I get too excited, but I'm just thinking that very often, especially with large groups, we forget about the fact that for some who are in the call, it might be early morning, and for others, it might be late evening. So to acknowledge that there are different energies in the space, and this is a nice visualization to just draw attention to that.
Absolutely.
I think so. And again, I know you have an entire category. By the way, I love your categorization on your podcast. You got those little dots that come up for your podcast and all these different categories, about 8 different categories, including philosophical, which is a pretty big bucket. I was very happy to see, right? The underlying philosophy here is actually something which is simple and very powerful in our opinion. It is, you're telling people, I see you, I hear you, I acknowledge you. What we're doing otherwise is I pretend I hear you and I don't acknowledge you. And that makes all the difference, because to your earlier point, there are a lot of people who are actually jaded, who know that when a presenter or a facilitator is asking, hey, where are you joining us from? He doesn't really care, or she doesn't really care. She's just asking it to kill time. So they don't answer. But if I'm sitting in, let's say, South America, and I see the map lighting up and I see there's not a single dot on South America, I almost feel it my cosmic duty to type Brazil or Argentina and get that dot on the map, because how can I not mark that present? People participate when they know they're not ignored. It's very simple, actually, if you think about it, right? But it's very powerful in our opinion. So I think the underlying philosophy that underpins all this is very basic human nature. No one likes to be ignored.
Yeah, philosophy and psychology. Yeah, the human nature.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would be pretty rude for me to ask you a question and then just continue the conversation like I'm not even waiting for your answer. But that's what we do in large groups, because our excuse is, hey, what else can we do? How can we have a conversation that scale with 40 people?
Yeah.
What if you could? That's kind of what we're pointing towards, right?
Yeah, and still, I think it's also interesting because you don't have the excuse anymore to just ask questions or to give prompts without an intention. Because if you do have the opportunity to actually get the information out and to visualize it, then you actually do want to do something with it.
Correct. You're imputing intent onto it, because it's like, I want to do something from it, which is for us to collectively see our answers and have a tangible visual manifestation of it, right?
Yeah. So what have you observed because I assume that you've done a lot of research before and still in the development of this tool. So I assume that you're sitting in a lot of workshops.
Oh, we're learning all the time.
So what is it? Because just a visual representation of a dot is not engagement. Well, it is a first step. I think it's a great way to wake everyone up and to, as you said, give them the impression, give them the feeling and the respect that they are seen and heard. What is it else? What's the magic sauce for engagement in large groups? What have you found out?
Tina, do you want to take on the workflow, or I think that's a good way to kind of pin some of the things we've seen, right, in terms of the entire StreamAlive workflow in some ways, because we try to capture some of the things that we've learned from how people work in in workshops, not to borrow your URL, but how people work in workshops has taught us a
Mhm.
lot about this entire cycle of engagement, so to speak, right? And I'll jump into it. Feel free to jump in
Yeah.
and chime in on that. So, 4 parts to it really. One is planning for it, right? I mean, there's a classic, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. And I think that applies even more so in the facilitation world. You have to keep some room for improvisation, but by and large, you have to have some skeleton of a structure around how you want to move people from easy, simple prompts to sometimes deeper prompts. You can't kick off the session with, hey, what's the meaning of life? Right. I don't know if you're ever going to get to that, but if you want to get to it, you probably want to get to it in the 42nd minute as opposed to in the first minute or something like that, right? So planning is a big part of what we do over here. So you talked about us attending workshops and things, and we've attended so many workshops. I've lost count of it around with teachers, sellers, entertainers, marketers, all of it. And there are different patterns, there are different templates, and we try to capture some of those in terms of here are different templates. If you're doing an AMA session or a live stream or a webinar, or you're doing a cohort-based course or a single session, that's something, here is a typical workflow of things that you want to do, right? Interesting thing there's also everyone's talking about Chat GPT, and I know you did an entire podcast where you talked to Chat GPT, for instance, right? So everyone's talking to Chat GPT in podcasts and everywhere else, but there's a lot of stuff you can take from there as well. So StreamAlive actually uses GPT to help presenters come up with interesting questions. So let's say I'm doing a workshop on molecular gastronomy,
Mhm.
and I'm
Of
thinking
all
of
topics.
I know it is what everyone is thinking about right now. So that's obviously what we're all thinking about. But let's say I'm doing a workshop on that, or there's so many colorful topics all of us have, right? And I could go to StreamAlive and say, come up with a poll that I can ask people when I'm teaching molecular gastronomy. And by the way, if for all those listening, if you actually try that out, it gives you perfect answers. It will say which of these are your favorite techniques. I was zapped. Spherification, something else, solidification, emulsification. It was perfect. So you don't even have to think about the prompts at times because you can get help with that. So templates and AI can help you come up with prompts. So really, there's no excuse for making it a two-way interactive session, which is the whole planning part. The second part of the workflow we've seen is tracking the conversation, right? I've seen so many sessions have the speaker needs someone to help them monitor the chat, because the primary job of that person is often look for questions people have put it, copy it, and put it in a Google Doc or a Notion doc so that I can address it at the end of the session. We do that entirely automatically. So StreamAlive is in the session, and StreamAlive was in this session, and I said, hey, Miriam, is it cold out there? And I put that in the chat. The app would pull that out and put it saying that's a question that Lux asked in the 23rd minute. So tracking the chat for questions for starters, but down the line, we're taking this in very interesting directions. Just imagine asking people, hey, everyone, we want to stay in touch after this. So if you're up for it, put your LinkedIn profile URL out here, or put your website, or put your favorite song or your favorite podcast. And at the end of it, StreamAlive will curate, this is coming very soon, curate it into here are the LinkedIn profiles that are shared, here are the website URLs that are shared.
And this is a playlist.
Here's a playlist of it. Here is the music that is a vibe of this tribe, for example, right? So there's a lot of stuff you can do because there is gold in that chat. I mean, it's people sharing their collective conscious for that 1 hour that they're together in a virtual space, and why lose it, right? So there's so much of amazing things over there. It upsets me that after every big session, that chat is dead. Very few people actually download it or keep it or look back at it. That moment is gone when there has been so many insights and so many of them. So we want to make sure that is captured for everyone for posterity. The third part is increasing engagement. We talked about the maps, and we can jump into them, but there's a lot of other visual interactions that you can pull from the chat, right? And Tina or I can share some of the other ones that we're cooking or have cooked and expect to cook in the future. Sorry, I keep talking about food, molecular gastronomy and cooking.
It's your metaphor.
It's my favorite metaphor. And the last part is analyzing, because we were also co-founders at an analytics company, which we ran before this, called Unmetric. So I think we have analytics in our digital DNA, so to speak. So post event, there's so many beautiful things that you can get out from the visualizations of what all happened. So we never imagined this, but now we have facilitators who take the screenshots that come out of the analytics, put it up on their LinkedIn and their Facebook and say, I did this session and look at this map that shows where my audience came from. Or I ask people, what is the number one pain point on scaling sales, and look at what they said. So suddenly it's become social and viral content that people are using, but it also feeds into, hey, this worked, this didn't work, do more of this, do less of this. And over time, we will also get prescriptive about it. So the idea is an entire workflow dedicated to audience engagement, right? With a fair amount of AI magic dust sprinkled on various things, right? There's also AI in understanding what's happening in the chat, because when you ask people, hey, where are you joining from? Let's take that simple example. People don't say New Jersey, New York, Amsterdam. I mean, some people do, and that's great, but most people say hi from sunny Singapore, or I live in Cairo, right? And for us, again, there are some very important. You should make it frictionless. You should not ask people to work in line with an algo or an application. The application should work with humans. So when someone says, I live in sunny Singapore, the application should and is intelligent enough to figure that they meant Singapore. So when Robert says, I live in sunny Singapore, it just puts a boom, a little dot in Singapore and says, Robert is here. Right?
Yeah.
So things like that. I mean, working with the flow of human conversation, I think is super important.
Yeah.
I'd like to add a little bit more color to what Lux has said. So, in the larger scheme of things, given that we have all this workflow planning, and increasing and tracking and analyzing, having seen the workshops of Gwen's and John's and all the various facilitators we've seen, I think that was your question originally, having seen the workshops, how do you increase engagement? I think in the, some of the engagement features we have, like the maps, brings in the group to a place of being comfortable enough to share. I think there's certain features we have, which in the beginning of your sessions, you can make people comfortable to be able to share. I think that's very important because, again, I come back to the personality type, the shy ones who normally don't like to contribute so much. They just like to listen. But we can pull them out and bring them into the group. Then the dynamics of the group changes, right? And once the comfort level is brought in, then we have other features which will then bring out a little bit deeper into their thoughts, right? We have something called the transient thoughts. We have a word cloud, and those other features we have, which then brings in that group dynamics of people learning from each other. Because if you are putting some interesting thing on philosophy of facilitation, I can learn from you also. It's not just from the facilitator. I can also learn from you, from the cohort. I think that's how we have kind of, we think about what are the requirements for a group, what will help the group become more productive, much more dynamic. And that's why the other track features which we have, that helps bring in a kind of a collective wisdom of the group also. And for a facilitator to be able to use these kind of features and to be able to bring in that dynamism and collective wisdom and things like that, that's where we see StreamAlive helping become the meta facilitator for facilitators. I would think.
Yeah.
Maybe Lux demo or other colors to that also.
I think
And I
wisdom of
love
the crowd is a very powerful thing on
The
that,
crowd,
capturing the
the
wisdom
Yeah.
of the crowd. Yeah.
I
very
just
well.
want to come back with that to emphasize, because I think, especially as facilitators, for speakers who come to an online event just to give their speeches, might be different. And still, I have very extreme opinions on that. That nowadays, if someone speaks online to a group, not recognizing that there is wisdom, expertise, and deep knowledge in the audience is almost disrespectful. And if they just want to give a speech, then record it and put it on YouTube. I can watch it at my own time. I don't need you to be here live. So the philosophy behind StreamAlive, what I hear from what you're saying, is really to acknowledge that, yes, there's not only one expert, but we do have the opportunity to really collect and crowdsource the expertise that is in the audience, which democratizes the space and then really leverages that we are sharing the same time and space with each other instead of watching a YouTube clip.
Absolutely. And just to add one little thing on the philosophy part of it, I think too many sessions are monologues. They need to be dialogues. So that's a very, very central philosophy of what we do. Right?
Yeah, yeah. And then what I was wondering was that many facilitators, and I think I used to be there as well, see the chat as a potential distraction or almost a competition, especially those who love the monologue, right? Because if then there are these participants who are always active in the chat and basically starting a side conversation. And then it seems as if there are two different camps of hosts, those who are absolutely cool with that and maybe also multitasking, keeping an eye on the chat. And then there are those who almost feel neglected because someone believes that the side conversation in the chat is more interesting. What is your opinion on that? Whether StreamAlive is actually amplifying that, so even makes it more of a competition, or what are the traps that it becomes a competition, and what can a speaker or a facilitator do in order to include it, so to make it one dance between the spoken word and the chat?
Thank you so much for asking that question, because and for giving that expression you just gave, which is the dance between the spoken word and the chat, because I'm going to borrow that with your permission, because that's exactly what we're trying to capture. Right? More and more speakers need to see the chat as complementary and not competitive to what they're doing. If you're in a room and you facilitated a conversation between people, you made an impact. If you're in a room and nobody chatted anything, you need to worry, because people were not moved enough to have a conversation around it. You didn't catalyze things. It need not be all about you. And I think that's an ego thing that people need to get comfortable with, right? Not to go on a tangent on this, but think about it, okay? It's been 38 years since PowerPoint was invented. And then you had Keynote and Google Slides and a whole bunch of tools, but everything was built with the presenter in mind. How do you talk? How do you talk? How do you talk? We like to think of it as we're the first platform built with how do you listen? How do you listen? How do you listen? Which kind of flips it, which doesn't mean you listen all the time. Talk, listen, talk, listen, have a conversation, right? Ping pong, exactly, right? I'm going to borrow that too. So ping pong and the dance. Yes, thank you for all the metaphors. Okay. So I'm into cooking and you're into sport and dancing. Okay, now we know what we're all into.
Yeah.
So the moment you bring the chat contextually into the screen, we talked about the map for an example, and Tina mentioned transient thoughts. So I want to talk about that, right? Transient Thoughts was actually inspired by going for a Hamilton play and being in the lobby and listening to people whispering out there and trying to strain your ears and listen to those conversations a little bit. So you get glimpses of conversation passing through your head without actually being able to linger on each conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if you could visualize that, which is what we're trying to say. So imagine asking people a deeper question like, why did you join us for this 1 hour session? What do you hope to accomplish? Right? Which is a twofold question. One is you get people's participation, and second, you get a bit more direction on where you should take this, because we all come with a preset set of assumptions saying, I'm going to talk about these things. But maybe that's not what your audience wants to listen today with everything that's happening and how they're feeling. And this time of the year when it's winter or spring or summer or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why not ask them and tailor your speech accordingly? So imagine asking people, hey, why did you join us today? And people are giving it one after the other. And you have 38 people answering that question and little thoughts flying through the screen. So basically the chat is powering these colored bubbles of thoughts, which is almost like everybody peeking into everyone's heads and looking at it. It's a very powerful thing. It's that ephemeral feeling of listening to everyone's voices.
Mm-hmm.
So I think your expression on dance between the main thing and the chat is absolutely that. You need to dance solo at times, you need to dance with your partner at times, and many partners coming in at the same time and having a visual manifestation makes it very powerful, because then it's not me talking all the time, it's me talking and asking, and then those answers are part of this collective thing that we're all doing together. Or if it's a single word thing saying, what do you think is the most important quality for a facilitator? And people are giving answers like, listening and empathy and things. And as they're typing it, a word cloud is populating and the word empathy becomes big. And we kind of say, okay, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
A lot of you said empathy, right? It's a conversation at scale. Of course, it requires a different skill set to be comfortable with this, to park your ego aside a little bit and to kind of zig and zag with your tribe and with your audience, to improvise a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it'll make for much better sessions and presentations and conversations, right?
Absolutely. And as you were speaking, there are so many things to just unpack here. One is, and that's just a side comment, that the beauty, how I understand it, of the tool is that, yes, of course, you can create a word cloud with a Mentimeter, but you have to ask participants to open another tab. And this is a real danger for distraction. The chat at least keeps them in the conversation with the group. And another tab is like sending them to the coffee machine. And then most probably they never come back. So everything stays inside there. But then on the other hand, and that's what you just mentioned with, it requires another tool set. When I listen to you, how to use the prompts and how to interact with it, it reminds me of what I've learned from my conversation work with ChatGPT, that those who are capable already, they will be enhanced. So it leverages their skills of listening, of asking the right questions, of using the information the right way to reflect it back to the audience. Whereas those who are maybe lacking behind beforehand already, who had problems of being present, problems asking the right questions, they will fall behind even more. Because you need to know how to interact with such a level of AI, right? And how to use it for your advantage. Do you see the risk that these AI-enhanced software or AI-enhanced sessions actually put even more of a divide of those who have an impact on others and those who are left behind and then become voiceless? It's maybe too philosophical.
It's a very deep question. Who was it? I think it was Arthur C. Clarke who said this amazing thing. He said the best technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Mm.
So, I mean, and we don't have to search hard for that. For example, one of the central philosophies, we have a couple of philosophies that direct what we do. I mean, with inclusivity, for example, it's frictionless inclusivity. And you alluded to it because if I ask you a question and say you can only answer if you go to the ballot box in the coffee machine and put your number there and make sure that it falls in and it's folded 4 times, and then you come back over here, that is not inclusivity. That in our book is a lot of friction that adds more. Right? Your other point on AI and other things, I think the more assistive and invisible they are, the better it is. Like I mentioned to you that we have an AI that works on when someone says hi from sunny Singapore, just picking up the Singapore part of it and putting it out there. Now that is totally invisible. The user is simply saying hi from beautiful Delhi, and StreamAlive is picking up the Delhi part of it. The person doesn't know that there was an AI happening in the back, which uses natural language processing to parse it, index it against a geo database, and figure out that the person meant Delhi. So our philosophy on that is that anything you incorporate should be invisible and not intrusive, right? Because if you tell people you got to go through this whole learning curve and figure out things, it's going to create that divide that we're talking about. But I mean, there is AI happening when you type something on Google search, not just today. When you typed it a year ago, it was figuring out intent based on intelligence that had garnered from millions and zillions of similar searches. It's happening all around us. It's just that it's invisible. So I think the more it stays invisible and becomes incorporated into workflows without having to force people to change things, the easier it becomes. The deeper change is one of people moving, at least in our world, from a talking mode to a listening mode, which is, our vision, for example, is that just like today, you'd be surprised to walk into a room and find someone using an overhead transparency on one of those light box projectors with a light and a periscope.
Remember those from uni.
I'm dating myself by mentioning that, I realize, but you remember that, right? You've seen those.
Yes. This, I think, in the audience, if you're laughing at this joke, means yes, you're old as well.
So since we're already sharing this joke, Miriam, let me ask you, have you seen an overhead projector of that kind with transparencies in the last 5 years?
No. And then someone just using their saliva to rub it up when they made a mistake.
Thank you. I'm glad to know I'm not the only person who did that. Right? I'm sure a lot of people are listening and wondering, why are you spitting on your presentations? But never use permanent markers.
That a lot.
So, I mean, we would be hard pressed to find someone doing that right now because we've moved to a new technology. Our vision is in 5 years from now, if you find someone doing a monologue and never having a conversation with your audience, you should be like, oh my God, that's so ancient. I've never seen that before. Most people present while having a conversation. This person just spoke. How rude. Spoke for 45 minutes without listening to their audience. Oh my God, that's crazy, right? We see a world like that and hope for a world like that.
Hopefully it's I hope that the managers and will run to get facilitation training as they did run to get the PowerPoint training in the past, because basically that's it, right? In the PowerPoint presentation, you're just speaking to someone, and if you're using the presentation in a facilitative style, then you include the audience and it becomes a dialogue.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it should be, I mean, just like we train kids in school to make PowerPoint presentations, we should train kids in school to be better facilitators. I think it's very, very required at the school level.
And still, I think, yes, the issues, and that's where the, I think, divide comes in, that in order to make it a dialogue, as you said, you have to be able to improvise and to react to whatever happens. You have to be able to be open-minded that maybe you cannot follow your script. And I think this brings even forth the importance of facilitation skills, or the mindset that you have to be present and you have to be grounded. Because if you don't have if you don't have the self-confidence or even the knowledge, then yes, you better stick to your slides, because the first person who has a question that you cannot answer, or you will become defensive if you realize that there's someone in the audience who might actually know more than you. That's scary.
Yep.
So I think there will be, when I think about it, there will be a big resistance to use tools like StreamAlive by those who are actually afraid of the audience.
Afraid of the audience, and to borrow something from one of your recent guests, I might get the name wrong, and I apologize. I think it was Pauline who spoke about play.
Yes, Pauline,
right?
yes.
Yeah. So I think that the talk was around, play and purpose, around engagement, and so a lot of what we do in terms of features and things, if you look at whether we talked about the map or the thought bubbles flying around, or we have this other feature I should talk about because that's so rooted in play, which is called the winning wheel. Okay, so imagine I run the map and then I press a button and say I want to spin a wheel with the names of every person who answered the map question. I just press a button and it happens automatically. StreamAlive says these 26 people answered the map question and puts all their 26 names in a big wheel. I press a button, it spins fast, and then it slows down and it stops at Miriam. And hey, Miriam, you answer this question. First of all, thank you so much for participating. Tell us about where you're from, right?
Wow, yeah. And I will not use the chat anymore afterwards. Yeah, but that's great, yes.
Yeah.
Because then even if you have a small screen, if you have a large group, you cannot see everyone on your screen. And like
Correct.
that, everyone has the same chance.
Or picking someone to be picked out, or someone, or you can simply say we're going to give a goodie bag to anyone who participated at least 3 times in the session, and that can also be done. But all of these, the point is getting at is infusing a sense of play. So in addition to what you mentioned about, a presenter being willing to leave their ego at the door and being willing to improvise a little bit and listen to the audience, I think we also need a little more play, like Pauline mentioned in your conversation with her, in every session, right?
Yeah.
If the pandemic taught us that we can do meetings in our pajamas, why can't we play in those meetings as well, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And one other thought that just crossed my mind when you mentioned how the AI is able to screen the chat and then extract different information at the end to basically make a report out of it. Here are all the links, here's the playlist, here are all the questions. I was just thinking of meeting minutes, how many people on this world are wasting their time writing meeting minutes that nobody uses. Nobody ever looks at them again. And I think the chat is one of those underused resources. Nobody ever looks at the chat again. The number of times that I have saved the chat because there was so much information in there, and then I tell myself, okay, I'm gonna sit down and read through it. And I never do, because you have this ugly text document with all these timestamps and all these names that it actually takes an AI to extract the value of it. And I'm wondering whether StreamAlive would then also be able to basically write summaries, because I'm always wondering, why do we actually have to write meeting minutes afterwards? Why can't we ask the participants to write the meeting minutes for us by, please write in the chat what the 3 most important things you're taking away from this meeting. Please write in the chat the action items and by when you'll do them. And then it could be a click to have the meeting minutes, the action items, and who does what until when. Is it possible? In theory.
It's let me take it a level higher. It's already there in the platform right now.
Oh, wow.
So at the end of the thing, press a button, it spits out not a meeting minutes per se, but a mother of all Excel files that says, here is the most engaged people Here are the questions you asked and the responses you gave. Here is a replay of all the results that people had, including what their takeaways were, where they joined you from. And it gives a full summary of that entire thing. Yes, absolutely.
And what about, may I play the devil's advocate? I'm German, I'm allowed to. Data privacy. So and the reason why I'm asking, I still have to laugh when I think about it, especially when I had this phase where I worked for a client with a lot of students, and I always start with the turn to your neighbor moment. So sending them into breakouts. You announce that they will be in breakouts and poof, 50% of the participants are gone. And I can imagine that if, in a similar way, that there are some who would shy away from being put on the spot or who being observed, Big Brother is watching you. Is there something that participants have to check a box, or can they opt out? That they say, okay, if you want StreamAlive to ignore you for the next 90 minutes, please type something in the chat.
At this point, no, there's nothing like it. So the whole idea is, let's take a step back, right? We see the world of sessions as, two universes. There's one which is the universe of people, which has sessions that have less than 10 people in the room, and sessions with more than 10 people in the room. And as is obvious, we are focused in that universe with more than 10 people in the room, because if it's less than 10 people in the room, if you have 4 people, you should not be asking them to put in the chat where they're joining from. You should be asking them in plain language, right? We've seen a lot of tools in the last few years around that ecosystem of less than 10 people. So you've had Otter, Fireflies, and Fathom, and a whole bunch of note takers which are listening in, transcribing what people are saying. And now, to your earlier point, Miriam, you now have a whole bunch of meeting summarizing applications that will take this transcription that comes out of this, run it through ChatGPT, and then come back and say, here's a summary of what the entire thing does, right? So at a very broad level, we've already kind of given our permissions for a lot more than we really know. Because the moment you join a meeting where there's a note taker there, you're giving tacit permission to record your voice, actually, right? Every participant cannot record what's happening in the meeting. It's only the host or people who can record it. But think about it. You just talked about it a little while ago. At the end of a session, you can click on download chat and download their entire chat transcript. So actually, chat is something that we've already given tacit permission for anybody in the room to take back with them after the session is over. It's already buried in the terms that you agreed to when you signed up for a Zoom session. Because we do the session, 50 people, and I say, oh my God, there's so many amazing links. There is gold in the chat. Let me download this chat and keep this thing with all its ugly timestamps. And even though it doesn't look too great, I'm going to save it and hopefully I'll get to it sometime in the future. I can do that. And if you look at StreamAlive, we are taking a subset of that exact chat document, except there is a temporal nature to it, saying between now and here, people are answering a question on where they're joining from. Between here and here, we know that we're asked this question on what is your biggest pain point, right? And visualizing it and things. But actually, our data source is that file that anybody in the presentation can download without anyone's permission.
Yeah.
So incrementally, there's no increased permission you're doing besides what any other human being is already doing. And so we are actually at a very, very low level of permissions compared to any other tools out there, which actually record your voice, transcribe it, summarize it, and things like that. So that's kind of the reason that has not been an issue so far.
Makes sense.
It's that
makes sense, and still
TXT document.
I can hear some German colleagues screaming about data privacy. But yeah, and maybe we'll get to the point where, okay, by joining this meeting, this is what you agreed to. Yeah.
Let me try and put it another way also. The host of the meeting has invited me, has invited you, Miriam, has invited Lux into a meeting. And when we agree to attend the meeting, they itself, we are giving our approval that, yes, we're going to be part of the meeting. And as So for the host of the meeting, the information about who the participants are and what do they say is already, there's an agreement between the host and the invitees there. I think where the data privacy issue comes in is if you make the chat data public, or if you put the chat, the transcripts of the chat with the names of the people public, then there's the privacy issue. As far as StreamAlive is concerned, it's not making anything public. It's just working with the host of the meeting. So it's still within the domain of the meeting, and the information is only between the host and StreamAlive. So the data privacy norms and the data privacy regulations and the data privacy is between the host and StreamAlive.
Yeah. And it reminds me, last week, I ran a session that I called Facilitators Anonymous, where everyone joined from an incognito browser and renamed themselves into XYZ and turned the camera off. So I was in a space where there were only black screens called XYZ, and the chat was full of XYZ says and XYZ replies. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very fascinating in terms of group dynamics. But why I'm thinking of that is everyone has the choice to rename themselves, to give themselves any name, and thereby,
I'm
making
XYZ now. There I am, XYZ.
Yeah.
So I just changed my name.
Yeah, exactly.
So if I chat now, I'm XYZ. You don't know who I am.
Yes, exactly. And if everyone does it, suddenly the chat is 100% anonymous.
Right.
Just curious, so what was the biggest insight that came out of that session?
I think I have to split it up. I run the session twice. In the first session, the biggest insight was, wow, that we do have, or that there are some individuals who really enjoyed the space to speak their honest truth in anonymity and to be witnessed. So the entire topic was then, what would we say if we could? So there are so many times that we don't say what we think, and what if we did? So this was the topic. And then interestingly, in the second time that I ran the session, it was a totally different group dynamic. So there were a few who stayed at the meta level of the conversation. So they spoke about the impact of this rule or this anonymity instead of making it about themselves. And this changed the entire dynamic. Yeah, so we didn't go that deep. Yeah.
Yeah, that whole area of how do you behave when nobody is looking is a very deep area, actually, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I think in the spaces of Twitter, we see it a lot with the trolls, people just behaving very asocially because they can hide behind a nickname. And I think in very large video conferencing sessions, we might observe similar things, although I think less often, because there are less people watching and the trolls really like the stage.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, with that anonymity, you don't get that light on you on the stage, so that's not a great thing for a troll. But it's very interesting how people behave, and we've seen that on Twitter. We've also seen it in the surge of anonymous accounts that have come up and got sizable, followings as well. In the video world, we've seen the whole rise of virtual YouTubers or VTubers and how they come on and things. I think we're seeing facets of that in different slices of life, which will define culture in some very interesting ways. And Interestingly, we actually took a slice of that into our product in one way as well. Just want to touch upon that very quickly, if that's okay. We've been talking about online sessions and a lot more about online sessions. And a lot of the things we try to talk about is how do you recreate that real world vibe that you have of feeling of being alive in an online session. And you mentioned chat some time ago where you said, is it distractive? Is it this? Is it some speakers look at it as competing? Some look at it as complementary. We obviously look at it as very, very complementary. And our belief is that chat is one of the most powerful things in the online world that we need in the offline world too.
Mm.
Let me explain what I mean, right?
Yes.
Suddenly we are all going for all these conferences. I'm willing to bet with anybody that if you go to 100 people who attended a conference and they're sitting out there in the lobby grabbing their coffee and you go and say, hey, why did you come here? 90% will say for the networking. 10% will say to listen to this person, because if I want to listen to a speaker, I think you talked about it earlier, I could have watched the speaker's recording on YouTube or somewhere else later, right? But they came here for the networking. And then what happens? The coffee break is over. They walk into the room. They're sitting there. They're listening to the speaker talk about it, or a panel discussion talking about a subject. Let's say it's the future of electric cars, right? And I have a thought about electric cars because I've been researching electric cars all my life, but I'm in this audience and I'm turning to you, Miriam, and to you, Tina, sorry, XYZ, and saying, hey, you know something, I did this. And the person in front says, shh, right?
Yes.
So here we are. I'm here because I want to network with you and with Tina and with the person who's shushing me. But I'm expected to be quiet for the next 1 hour of this 6-hour session because I have to listen to these people who don't know who's in the room. So I'm thinking there was, just like you're allowed in the Zoom room to have a parallel conversation, why can't you be allowed to have a conversation here? So we actually have a solution for this as well, where the entire audience is encouraged to get on their phones through a link, which allows them to actually have a parallel chat conversation about anything under the sun.
Awesome. Thank
with
you.
Anonymity. So
Yes.
every person is given a default name. So I want to tie it back to the anonymity thing you said as well. The default name is an aquatic animal that has a funky color because it's alive in a stream. So you might be purple dolphin. And if you wanted, you could change your name to Miriam or to Tina, or you could remain purple dolphin if you want to keep that anonymity. And then the presenter is asking, hey, you folks, 500 people in the room, where are you joining us from? You just type in the chat, I live in sunny California, and a map pops up with California there, or you mention your thoughts over the future of EVs. So when the presenter is prompting you, you're part of that conversation. When the presenter is talking about other stuff, you're asking, is there lunch being served? Are there drinks afterwards? When does this get over? Why not?
Yeah.
Right? Who are we to tell adults don't speak, don't talk, as long as they're not being disturbing you, right? I mean, I know this is a bit of a contrarian and radical view, but we think that is, if you're joining an event for networking, you should be allowed to network and have a conversation.
Absolutely. And I think to assume that the person on stage is the most knowledgeable person in the room, that's outrageous. What if not? I mean, as you said, nobody knows who's in the room. And why not also listening to those who have something to contribute? And this has the potential to revolution or to actually make sense of hybrid meetings or hybrid conferences finally, because now the problem is that in the hybrid format, you do have the connection between people. So actually, in this sense, if it's a conference with just talks, it's easier and better to network online because of the chat function. But then, yeah, and this is missed by those who are in the space. And if you can bridge that, that is amazing. Because then you can eventually also, you read someone's comment online, although you're in the space. And then if you can connect to them, you can even continue the conversation. And then you do have a virtual coffee machine suddenly. Mm-hmm. Because someone who cannot join in the space can draw attention to them.
I don't know if you've seen the huge smiles on our end, but hybrid is exactly the direction we're pushing this forward to.
Yeah. Yeah, hybrid, large hybrid events. Awesome. I'm excited.
and one virtual coffee machine. So that's the other. So you got ping pong, we got
We
coffee
get a ping
machines, you
pong,
got sport.
then the dance
Dance.
between the
dance.
presenter and the chat.
Yeah.
And virtual coffee machines that don't do molecular gastronomy. Yes, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
What makes a workshop fail in your experience?
Not to harp on it, but ignoring the participants.
Mm.
Right. I mean, my grandfather actually, I come from India and from the southern part of India in a place called Chennai. We love renaming our cities.
I've been in Chennai.
It means beautiful.
Yeah,
Wow.
Mamalapuram.
Oh,
Not only have you been to Mamalapuram, you also pronounce that perfectly, which a lot of people in
yeah.
India find difficult. Wow. Okay. You obviously been to Mamalapuram. So, and you obviously know that Chennai, we used to call it Madras, and now we call it Chennai because we just like to confuse everybody when they come from. The moment you know we're in Madras, we say, okay, we're going to change the name and make it Chennai. So
Sorry, I
my
didn't want to interrupt.
Oh no, that's good. It's amazing that you've been there, and it's one of our favorite places too, Mamallapuram and Pondicherry further south there from there. So my grandfather was the first public speaking teacher in Chennai in 1979. He was way ahead of his time. He started teaching public speaking classes in the southern part of India at that point. And he used to have this simple rule, every 5 minutes, ask your audience to do something. To answer a very binary question in most cases, because you can't ask them to shout out an answer like they can on chat. I mean, he passed away before the internet became a thing. So he didn't see this world coming. I'm sure if he were, he would have made a much better version of StreamAlive many years ago. But he would tell people like, ask your audience something every 5 minutes. Otherwise, you're going to lose them. I mean, to your question on, most of us don't do that. And he said, make it interesting, make it fun. The first time, asked them to raise their right hand. The second time, asked them to raise their left hand. The third time, asked them to stand up. The fourth time, ask them to start off standing up and ask them to sit down if they agree with something. Simple things, just movement, but more importantly, inclusivity, engagement, getting people's opinions on binary responses, because by sitting down, standing up, left hand, right hand, you can only get binary responses, right? So suddenly that black and white has now become all these colors of gray that we have over here, and we're not using it. We're still having these monologues and not dialogues, and that's why we actually feel very passionate about in 5 years someone having a monologue should be like, oh my god, that can you believe it, that guy didn't just ignore the entire audience for 45 minutes straight, or even 15 minutes straight, or even 10 minutes straight.
Yeah, hopefully in 5 years we will then think, oh, maybe that's just a hologram of that person.
but that's the reason all of us sign up for webinars and don't attend them, because we wait for the recording so that we can watch them at 1.3 times the speed, even if everyone sounds like they're in a cartoon or something like that, because hey, we are short on time, and no difference between anyway it is a monologue. I might as well see a monologue when I'm walking on the treadmill and at my own time. So your question, I think that the reason is very simple. We ignore the audience. We have monologues, not dialogues, and that's the most common reason in our opinion.
Yeah, and then there's so many more impacts, because if those who invite to the webinar, they anticipate that nobody actually will show up. So their motivation is decreased. So they won't, because we do need, even in a webinar, we need the energy from the group. If we're just speaking to the void, people will recognize that. And then the webinar, the quality will decrease anyway. And then it's just a vicious circle. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you have you pointed a very good thing there about how the presenter needs the energy from the group also. Um, I mean, there are some presenters who mean really well, they don't intend to make it a monologue, but they're making it a monologue because they didn't know that, engaging your audience is important, or for whatever reason, right? And sometimes their energy levels can deflate because they don't have that feedback from the audience, especially in an online world. in an offline world, maybe you might see people, smiling or laughing or, intensely nodding or whatever in an offline world. But in an online world, it's very difficult to see the reactions of the audience. So, for a presenter also who really has good intentions, so, of having a great workshop, may not have enough energy because they're not getting the energy back from the audience. That feedback is not coming back. So for the presenter also, it's extremely important to get the feedback from the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have some friends who are comedians, and they
Yeah.
were talking about how during the pandemic, it was so difficult to do a
So
stand-up
difficult.
comedy when you don't hear that laughter,
Yeah.
right? And you mentioned something very deep, actually, Miriam, when you said people go for conferences and these guys on the stage are supposed to be these so-called experts, right?
Mm.
And even on webinars, you get amazingly talented people. Let me illustrate where I'm getting at with an example. I attended a webinar a few weeks ago on startup funding in these very uncertain scenarios, right? We're co-founders at a startup. We're in the funding ecosystem. We were very interested in this session, but we are an early stage startup. We're looking at the seed funding stage and everything. And I saw some of the other attendees and some of the names that were mentioned there, Googled them up. Almost all of them were seed stage, early stage kind of startups, right? The people in the panel have experience across the board. They were a very good panel. I will not name the company. I will not name the panelists because I don't think that's required, but they could have spoken about any topic under the sun. They assumed that everybody is looking for growth equity, which is a much later stage of company that all of us hope to be in about 3 years' time. And they were talking from that perspective entirely. So here was a whole bunch of people to whom these people could have spoken. If they had taken a second to say, what stage are you guys in? Enter one, obviously I'm biased towards StreamAlive, but imagine asking, okay, folks, just tell us what stage you are in and put it in the chat. And the word cloud populates saying early stage, seed, pre-seed, not funding, or you enter a poll. And then you tailor your entire panel discussion with these very, very knowledgeable people around who's in the room, as opposed to making an assumption and talking for half an hour on a topic that nobody is interested in because it's not relevant for them. And that happens all the time. You assemble this amazing group of talented panelists. 2-3 of them are local and they just drove in. 2 of them had to fly in and they had to be hosted in a hotel and they'd be put out there for the speaker, or they have finally come into your session after months of planning if you're doing it on Zoom or somewhere. And then you waste it away because they're talking to an audience with whom they've got a fundamental disconnect since you didn't bother to have a conversation with the audience, right? It happens all the time, and it vexes us. So
And
much of wasted
especially when
energy.
especially if it's a panel, because for a talk, I can somehow understand because a person has prepared a talk, so it might be difficult to change the topic. But for a panel, it's not scripted anyway. Yeah, and I wonder what it is, this fear of interacting with the audience, because Tina, you just mentioned that it is many don't know how to interact and how to ask the audience. And I wonder whether it's really a lack of knowledge or it's a lack of courage. Because I spoke with a friend the other day. She was supposed to give a speech in front of 1,000 lawyers. And we're discussing about her speech, and she asked me for my feedback. Such a facilitator. I'm like, ask them when you go on stage, ask them a question, make them think, make them come on board. I'm like, you cannot ask them a question. Like, why not? Because, I mean, they don't even need to answer. Ask them a rhetoric question to make them think. But it was so scary for her because it's so much out of the norm of what lawyers who stand on a stage do, that I think it really needs a paradigm shift of, the 95% or 99% ignored.
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I think every single conversation has a canvas for conversation, right? If for example, if you're talking to 1,000 lawyers, first of all, fantastic, you're talking to 1,000 lawyers. What kind of lawyers are they? Are they civil, criminal? Do they practice family law, marriage law, property law, something else, right? What is one case in the courts right now that you're following? And then imagine everyone, that wisdom of the crowds that Tina was talking about a little earlier, everyone sharing it and someone saying this versus this. Oh, I haven't heard of that. And bubbles flying. Suddenly you're facilitating, you are facilitating these 1,000 people learning from each other. But to your point, I think sometimes it is a question of it's a question of a mindset shift, and it's also a question of courage at times, because we're too used to a certain way of doing things. I mean, like we said earlier, it's 38 years since PowerPoint was invented, and we're still following the same format, saying, break my thought process into these things called slides and talk to people one slide at a time, which is, it's a fundamental mindset shift that needs to happen.
So talking about the mindset and mind shift, and I come back to personality types also, even for the presenter, right? I'm more reticent, shy. Lux is more, confident about presenting and presentation. I am not very confident about in a large group presenting and presentation. That's just how I am. I'm more reticent about that, right? I'm like a little bit, okay, I'm not so courageous. Let me put this. I'm not courageous. Lux is very brave. So Lux, it comes to him naturally. For me, I need to learn to do that, right? To be able to go to put myself in front of a large group and be able to talk and have a dialogue and have a conversation. Maybe it will come with time and with practice. Maybe I need someone to coach me, to help me be able to do that. Or maybe I need a tool which will help me just from being a presenter, but also be a little bit of a performer. So, to get the crowd to be with me, to bring in all of them, or to be able to have the courage to answer their questions, or to be able to have the courage to say, okay, let's do this together. Your thoughts are important as mine. So it's like more of like, how do we go about this? And the more people do that, I think the more the meetings and the events will be much more fruitful and much more productive and much more for everyone, for the participants, for the presenters too.
Yeah, to the point. And I think the more we can facilitate this, independent of personality types. And it makes me think of the book that Lux wrote, Name, Place, Animal, Thing, which is, I haven't read the book yet, but if I'm not mistaken, it's about the phenomenon that we're still, or what are the alternatives to asking someone, so what do you do? And although everyone knows that asking the question, what do you do, basically leads to almost boring conversations, we still continue to ask this question. So what does it take to actually, what does it take to change this pattern and to help people become more brave in asking questions, or more brave to interact, to invite for dialogue, independent of their personality type?
And then on the book, exactly what you said, right? When you ask someone, what do you do? The typical answer is the most recent line on their LinkedIn profile, right? That's what people say, right? And that is the whole theory behind the name part of it, because the name we wear is often what we do for a living, and we assume that is a thing. But if you dive in deeper, someone asking you, so what do you do, is basically saying, I want to know more about your story. What common ground do we have, right? So I actually answer the question with a question. When people ask me, so what do you do? I kind of put them on the spot a little bit, to be honest, by saying, do you mean for work, or do you mean in terms of my hobbies and interests in life and stuff? And it would be a very, very unique person to say only about work. I don't want to know about the rest about it, because what you're doing then is creating a canvas for, there are more sides to me as there are to you. So let's talk about not just work, let's talk about the other things. And they'll say, yeah, but for work and other stuff as well. People typically say that. And say, yeah, for work. work on a technology company, then do this. Last week I did this. And then suddenly you're finding that there might be more intersections, right? I mean, just like when you talk with people, you say, oh, I know this person, you know this person, I saw that you're connected to them. I went to college with them. I just caught up with, and thanks for introducing us to John. We just caught up with John last time. We met up with Gwen when she was in New York. We're like basically saying our tribes have intersections, so to speak.
Yeah.
So what do you do is actually an excuse for, it's taps with the tribal nature of who we are. And it's like, but we're taking it purely to that work scenario. And I think that's a very, very big mistake, because veering it back into life and hobbies and all of the other things. So the book is a metaphor for those things. So name is the titles we hold. We're going in reverse order. Thing is like, make more things. All of us make things, virtual, physical. I mean, you've made what, 210 podcasts so far, besides the other stuff that you do?
Yeah.
Around that much. We're not making all this stuff. So make stuff that allows you to connect with people. And your podcast has allowed you to have so many conversations with so many people, and so many people like me to vicariously have a conversation with Pauline, who I've never met, but I think I know her through your podcast, right? So these connections are facilitated. So I won't take it into a tangent on the book. As you know, I'm an expert at taking things into tangents, but I think there's a lot more for us to connect when we ask people, so what do you do? And it needs to be seen in its purest intent, which is, tell me your story and let's see where all we connect, right?
And maybe to close, if it doesn't open another kind of big Pandora box, what are the questions that are helpful to ask in a chat with a large group? Because, so what do you do if we're talking to a large group and we want to get a sense of who is in the space? Is a very good question.
Right.
What do you work? Or what is your hobby? And then I think there must be better questions than others in the context of large group engagement. Do you have a tip?
Certainly do, because we actually follow that in some of our sessions and webinars and things. And I don't think we need to overthink it too much. It's actually a very simple thing, right? It's exactly like you might do on a one-to-one conversation. Hey, so what do you do? Where are you from? That's kind of how you open a conversation. This is kind of what I think we want to address in today's conversation. End of it, you say, did we address it in today's conversation? And what are next steps? Which is kind of what we do in a meeting. It's exactly the same format for a large group. Who are you? Where do you come from? Great icebreaker, great to warm up people, get a sense on. I mean, all of us geo-identify. Even if you don't ask people, where are you from? You'll see that on webinars. People say, I'm in Spain. Hello from this place. People like to anchor themselves literally in a place and say where they are from. So why not tap into that to get people in? Who are you? Like, I mean, are you, for example, in that panel discussion example, are you a startup founder? Are you an investor? Are you an early stage? Are you a later stage? Or a free form open question where you just type in one word your profession, saying, I'm a student, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a technopreneur, I'm a facilitator, I'm an actor, I'm a dancer, I'm a singer, I'm a teacher. There's so much of color that comes up, that can come up in terms of who are you, right? And I think a very important question, which is where the bravery comes in now, is why are you here? You've done me the privilege of giving me the next half an hour of your life. I need to respect that and understand why you've come here, because maybe I can be candid and tell you, if you come here and say, I've come to learn molecular gastronomy, I need to be candid and tell you I'm not an expert in teaching molecular gastronomy and you probably shouldn't be here. You're in the wrong place, right? If you come here saying, I want to understand. So we actually learned, this is kind of case of eating our own dog food. We were first running some scripted to and fro sessions in our webinars. And then we started asking people, why did you join? Someone saying, I love the product. I just want to see what else you're doing in the roadmap. Someone else saying, I'm confused about how to use it. I want some help with it. Someone else saying, I want to know how other people have been using it, right? Someone saying, I want to meet the other users. So that then drives it, because we actually heard a couple of those things and we said, okay, we shouldn't be doing these as webinars. We should be doing them as meetings, because people want to meet other users. We should have meetings. So we actually stopped our webinars now and we're going to do meetings, right?
Awesome. Yeah.
So why are you here is a very important question, because it then allows you to respect your audience and hopefully address some of those things as to why they're here. And it's a classic, tell them what you'll tell them, and then tell them what you told them. End of it, like you're taking people through a transformational process or something, or educating them or teaching them or sharing something. What are What did they like, right? I mean, it's also great feedback for you, because if you have 3 modules in your session and people don't like the second module and you say which one of these was the most interesting and everyone said the first and third, it's a sign that you should probably knock off the second one.
Yeah.
And then if there is a call to action, which might be like you implementing a certain skill in your workplace, or which might be you taking the next step if it's a webinar or something like that, or you essentially changing a behavior, asking people about that, saying, when do you think you might use this that you just learned? Is it next week, next month, next thing, or an open-ended question? And of course, peppering it a couple of times with questions, right? So who are you? Where are you from? Why are you here? What did you find most useful? What are you going to take forward? And questions. If you do these 6 things that we just talked about, and if you divide them across a 45-minute session, essentially you're having a conversation every 6 to 7 minutes.
Yeah.
My grandfather would be very happy.
Wonderful. Thank you. There's one question that I always ask and I haven't asked yet. So I hope you have another minute. What's your number 1 facilitation challenge?
Okay. So still keeping that meta facilitator hat on, of we like to think of ourselves as meta facilitators. It's ironical that facilitators change behavior, but for us, the number 1 challenge for us as a technology company, as a tool, is to change behavior for facilitators themselves, to make them move from, position of authority to a position of vulnerability, and to move from scripted stand-up comedy to moving to improv comedy, to move from I know all the answers to we know all the answers. That behavioral change, I think, is probably the biggest challenge, and it'll happen over time. We also sometimes get greedy where you want everyone to move right away. It happens over time where people get exposed to it, try it, but that's a number 1 challenge.
Yeah, that's it. I think I think that's the most that is the most the number 1 challenge we're trying to work on a bit more. Yeah.
And thank you for working on that on behalf of all the facilitators and speakers. And on behalf of all the disengaged, ignored audiences.
Thank you. I mean, we've been part of this ecosystem for a couple of years now, and they're just such amazing, beautiful people at its core, right? I mean, not saying this to flatter you, but people like you and some of the folks you introduced us to, and some of the folks who introduced us to you, all amazing people with so many beautiful things to share, and being a part of that and helping make that happen is it's one of the things we learn from being serial entrepreneurs is when you have that purpose that is so strongly ingrained, it helps you weather a lot of challenges and keeps you grounded to that North Star of what you want to build. And this ecosystem we're building for is as beautiful as it gets.
Yeah, it's people are so generous. The generosity amongst the group of facilitators is amazing, where you share with each other so much. It's amazing to see that.
Yes, I agree. Thank you so much for sharing so generously with me on the behalf of the audience.
This was a lot. This was like a conversation with friends, and thank you for making it that way.
Yeah, beautiful conversation. Yes. Yeah, finally I get to say that.
And I will put all the links to StreamAlive and your meetings in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Anything else we can help with, you need afterwards, you know how to reach us.